welcome back to another Odyssey 40k video. In this one we're doing a tier list of the new balanced data slate that just dropped. I've had a few days now to kind of take in the new detachments, take in all the changes, and I'm going to list all factions from S tier all the way down to D tier. Okie dokie, let's get straight into it then, right? So as I said, there's only going to be 5 or 6 factions in each tier. We have S tier, which is the top of the meta, the strongest things you could be playing right now, in my opinion. We have A, which is stuff that's really competitive but doesn't breach that top level. Then we have B tier, which is like the middle grounds, good factions, can definitely win tournaments, but is a little bit more difficult or needs a little bit of like help with what it's paired into, might have some more bad matchups. Then we have C tier, which is the stuff that's struggling a little bit, still probably has some good matchups, but some bad matchups as well, but getting to the more bad matchups. Then we have D tier, this is the stuff that's really struggling in the meta right now. It definitely can be punched up with a really good pilot, but a lot of the time this stuff is struggling. It's either because the rules nerfs, the meta at the moment is really hostile for them. There's a bunch of different reasons why these factions might be in D tier. And again, if I put your faction in a tier that you don't agree with, let me know in the comment section down below where you think you would put it in the rankings, especially using my ranking style, which is even amount in each tier. It does look a bit more egregious when you look at the D tier with 5 things in it. That doesn't mean that I think there's 5 armies that are unplayable. It's just 5 armies that are really struggling. So without further ado, we've got all the armies down here, and we're just going to get straight into it. So I'm going to do like a brief description of the army, what I think it's good at, what I think it's bad at, and then we're just going to move on. These things usually take a little bit of time. I did try and actually record this with Jonty, but my internet played up a little bit, so apologies, Jonty. He was supposed to be on to be the little devil's advocate to go against my opinions, but since that couldn't happen, recording this myself. Thank you, Jonty, for taking the time out to try with me anyway. Anyway, straight into it. We have Death Guard as our first option here. Death Guard they're a tricky one. So they have a couple of builds. The kind of generic build that you saw for a long time there with the 2 rhinos, 3 units of plague marines with all the characters. They had fights first, they had all the tricks, they had the good shooting, they had the good melee. It just dies too quickly now in the meta. There's so much, like an unbelievable amount of damage 2 and damage 3, that they just die far too quickly, and they're also just a bit too expensive for what you're getting out of them. They don't kill enough, and they don't survive enough. So they're kind of in this awkward ground where they just don't do enough. So then it skews you into other styles of builds where you're running like Mortarion with the triple predators, triple plague bursts, maybe even defilers, Chaos Knights, bringing in some brigands, stuff like that to really pump up and skew to the vehicle side, which I think is actually a really interesting list and very strong for teams. But we're doing more of a singles and holistic view right now. We're not going to go specifically team skews. So I think Death Guard probably end up in C tier on this ranking. If there's more than 5 that I think are in B tier, I'll just bump the top one down to the lower tier. But at the moment, I think they're a C tier army. They struggle. They're kind of like most powerful build is a complete skew build, which I don't even know how strong it is. It definitely has a lot of good damage 3 profiles, which is really good in the meta at the moment. There's so much 2 wound and 3 wound models that the Death Guard army can deal with, but into pretty much everything else, it kind of just falls apart. So I think C tier is where we're going to stick for Death Guard. Next we have Adepta Sororitas. They got a nice little buff in the data slate with gaining some more miracle dice. It was capped to it was once if a unit died per phase you got a miracle dice. Now it's just every time a unit dies again you gain a miracle dice, which does lift up the number of miracle dice you have, and they had some points cuts on their like more melee units. All in all though, I don't think it was enough. All the kind of damage dealers are still really expensive and probably a little bit overcosted for what they do. The Bringers of Flame nerfs that happened a while ago probably did too much damage to this faction and made a lot of the other detachments really, really difficult to play with, because you're playing such a premium because the possibility that you played it in Bringers of Flame. So this is going to be a rough one, but I think this is our first D tier, and I think this is going and probably going to stay here. I don't see a reason for it to leave. It has so many bad matchups. It has some nice matchups. It can play the tradey game quite well. Now that you can take more sacrosanct, that's kind of a more of an interesting build archetype. But really, I think they're just struggling to so much right now. I actually really can't think of many good matchups they have. So I think D tier is where they're going to be right now. Then we have Necrons. Necrons didn't get many changes at all. I think Doomsday Arcs went up 10 points again after they went down 10 points last data slate. Besides that, I don't think anything changed with them. But I do actually think they're very interesting. I think there's 3 really interesting detachments you can play with. The Awakened Dynasty, the Index detachment is still really strong. Has a really interesting play patterns. The constant rezzing, the bringing characters back to life. You can really control your primary. One Wraith Brick can be basically unkillable in the right situations. And then the bit more accuracy in your shooting actually really helps push the damage through, which is one really interesting way to play Necrons. Then you have the Canoptic Court and Star Shatter builds. Very different builds there. The Canoptic Court runs 2 to 3 Wraith Bricks. Very much more of a skew build, whereas the Star Shatter is a bit more wide. You can take the Silent King, you can take some more shooting resources, and it plays a lot more of the trading game, kind of like standard Warhammer, if you will. But I think all of those are interesting options. The Canoptic Court one is definitely the least interesting to play because it's very much, I'm going to run my Wraith Bricks for it, and then I'm going to have Doomsday Arcs and some extra chaff behind, doing all my kind of actions and stuff, and then you have probably one Immortals Brick that's going around trying to toast things. Is it good? Yes, it actually is pretty good. I think it's pretty strong, and I think it gatekeeps a lot of factions. If you build an army for singles that can't deal with at least one unit of Wraiths, you will just lose the matchup, especially against Canoptic Court, but against all of these different lists. If you can't deal with a unit of Wraiths, they will just win the game for the Necron player. So for that regard, I think I'm going to put them in B tier for now, but they might get pumped up a little bit to A tier, depending on how this list kind of goes. But at the moment, I'm feeling like they have some good matchups. They do have some bad matchups. Anything that can kind of double charge and kill a Wraithbrick really consistently, a lot of the lists kind of fall apart. If you're not playing the trading game, if you're going into stuff like Bio, they can just kind of damage check your entire army down. So stuff like that's not really great. But then against a lot of the other armies, they stay alive and they continue to score, and all they need to do is win by a couple of points and they're winning you the game, and it's kind of how they play a lot of the time. So I think they're very, very stable faction, and I think some really interesting builds are coming out there right now. Sadly, it's not a lot of new builds, it's a lot of iterations on old builds, but they're still working really well, so I think they're definitely something you want to have a look into. Now we have Agents of the Imperium, and these are going to go straight into D tier. Yes, you can do really well with them, but you are fighting an uphill battle the entire game. One of my good friends, Ashley, loves them and actually feels them to a very high standard and plays very well and does very well at tournaments. Consistently going 3-2 at tournaments. I know Courtney recently won a tournament in Wellington with them, playing a really interesting list with a bunch of transports and just trading pieces and just kind of overwhelming their opponent a lot of the time. So they definitely have some play. But I think there is so many armies that are easier to get that result with. And I think a lot of the agents' win rate is kind of because no one plays against them. So often it's your first or second time ever playing against the faction, which it's not a bad thing. And if you're piloting them, use it to your advantage. Obviously, you've got to explain everything your army does, but just not understanding the kind of play patterns can really go to the pilot's favor. So for that, I'm going to keep them in D tier. They're definitely not going to leave, but understand that if you have the correct pilot, they can be pumped way up to a B and A tier kind of army. If you get a lot of reps with them, understand how they play, and really utilize every single unit you're taking, they can be really strong. Everything here, if played by a specialist, is going to be a great army. There's no doubt about it. 40k at the moment is in such a great position where you can play a lot of armies and do very well. There is very few, if any, armies that, if you're playing it, you cannot win a tournament, which is an amazing thing to say. There's definitely armies that's going to make it a lot harder for you, agents and sisters, and some armies that'll make it easier for you. But that doesn't mean that you can't push up. It just might mean you might have to have a bit more like luck with what you get paired into, because there's obviously there's more worse matchups for you, and then you also have to play up in matchups where you might be in a even or slightly lower position, because as soon as you mess up, even in a good matchup, you're probably toast. Okay, so that's agents. Next we have Adeptus Custodes. This is one that I'm really excited with our new detachment. The Lions of the Emperor detachment, I actually think is quite good. It's going to take some testing to find out if it actually is really good. I have my friend David playing it at the moment to kind of test it out. He's really excited for it. He's running some Alaris bricks. He's got some Custodian Guard. So really utilizing the fact that you get +1 to wound and reroll wounds is a really strong combo to really push through damage. So you don't need as many units because you can kind of push so much extra damage through with your units. So I really like that. I also think Talons is a very strong detachment. It's probably better for singles because the reactive move in the movement phase is stronger than a reactive move in the shooting phase, because your opponent can play around it a bit more. And also just the kind of tricks you can do in Talons is probably better. And then it doesn't have the true raw damage that Shield Host has. Whereas Shield Host is kind of all damage, nothing else. Talons is all the tricks, and Lions is a bit more of a mix between tricks and damage, which is kind of cool. It's a nice medium ground, but I think Custodes already have a good damage profile, so having the extra tricks is probably better, but I'm really excited to see how the Lions go, and I do think there's going to be some really interesting builds up there. So for that, I'm actually going to put Custodes in A tier for now. Again, these might change. I'll fix them as we go, but I really think there's something there. The fight on death in Lions as well is really interesting. It is on a 4-up, but just having that in your back pocket, meaning all the melee matchups are quite good for you, or not, are better for you. I won't necessarily say good. So like stuff like that could be really, really good. Next we have the newest faction in 40k. We have the Emperor's Children. Now I actually haven't played a game against these yet. I've watched a bunch on YouTube. I've talked to some friends about them, about different concepts of they want to test some games that they've already played with them. And the kind of resounding feeling is they're a very niche army that can do a lot of things, but they also play the game super wide, and they just play really, really good basic Warhammer. They fight pretty well, they shoot pretty hard, and they just do a lot of things, and you get a lot of units for your kind of army. And with the faction abilities of fallback and shoot/charge, and advance and shoot/charge, just amazing abilities to have. So having just an amazing toolkit means that if you are a good player and you play this army a lot, you're going to get really good results with it. And you can always adapt to different metas, because you can swap out, say like Infractors for more Noise Marines if you want that, or whatever you need to do. You can kind of tweak your list a little bit. Obviously there isn't that huge of a selection, but especially if some of the units come down a bit of points in the next data slate, could be interesting. I think they're probably above Necrons, but they're definitely, I think, a B tier army. If you just pick up and play them, you're probably going to struggle a little bit, because they are fairly complicated to play, with the fact that if you fall back, you can't charge the same unit. Yada, yada. The restrictions that they have make things a little bit trickier. But they do have the power to really push in some, and pretty much every matchup. I would say Emperor's Children are one of those armies that doesn't really have a bad matchup, but doesn't really have a good matchup. So it's up to the pilot to win the maybe slightly bad matchups, and make sure they don't lose the slightly good matchups. But they don't. Everything is kind of up to the pilot's choice. There isn't really that it's like, oh no, if I play X faction, I just lose. I don't think they really have that, because they have all the damage profiles that they need, and they have all the tools that they have. So I think they're very much like the epitome of a B tier army at the moment. This might get proved wrong. I might see in a couple of weeks' time them running rampant at tournaments. But from what I've seen, from what I've heard, and again, I haven't played against them yet or played with them, this is kind of where I feel like they should sit with their rules. Next we have Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, AdMech is a really interesting one. If this was a teams tier list, I think that would be quite high. I think there would be a B or an A tier, because I think as a defender list, you can't beat AdMech. I think they're just such a powerful. If you play them to get a 9 or a 10 in differential, they can pretty much guarantee that so often. It is incredible. Dylan, the other weekend when I played Warp Wars and our team won, Dylan was on AdMech and he piloted them beautifully all weekend and gaining great results every single round, getting his matrix, getting those 9s, those 10s, those 12s, kind of, and just playing that game, but always pulling the worst matchup for the rest of us. So he never knew what he was going to play into and always brought home a lot of points. Saying that though, in a singles environment, I think they struggle a lot. I think they're really good at getting like an 8 or a 9 on differential, but that's losing the game by 10 to 15 points. That's not great. If you do that in a singles environment, you're just going to lose all your games. You might win a game, but I don't think that they're very consistent at winning 5 games in a row. I actually think that it's very tricky to win 5 games in a row with AdMech because they have quite a few bad matchups. There's lots. If you go into Chaos Knights, if you go into stuff like Custodes that can just kill them super fast, they just don't actually have a way of dealing with that, which can be a real big issue. If they go into Bile, they can actually just get wiped off the board, right? Like, I don't think it's a great matchup. There's a lot of bad matchups for them, which again, you're not going to lose by much. But in a singles environment, it doesn't matter if you if you lose by an inch or a mile. Like, losing is losing. So I actually think they're going to go in C tier for now, but like, again, if this was teams, they would be a lot higher because they have a very good position in teams. But in singles, yeah, I just don't really see it. I'll put them above Death Guard if I can do that. There we go. I think that works out a little bit better. But yeah, definitely in C. Next we have the army that can never be balanced correctly, Aeldari, and like, they have a lot of tricks. Assuming getting a debuff in the Data Slate was funny because I don't actually think personally, I said this from the get-go that Assuming is probably a trap. Dire Avengers also going up just probably means you just don't take that package anymore, which I think actually makes your Eldar list better than it did worse. So yeah, it's kind of like, it's one of those things. Inari is a problem. In the hands of a really skilled pilot, getting all the decision points right with the reactive moves, with the lethal intents, all this kind of stuff, with making sure you're sticking objectives, losing models so you can get fight first in your stuff, if you play that army perfectly, I think it's an S tier army and it can absolutely decimate things. But at the same time, you don't have that many resources. All it takes is for 1 or 2 mistakes to kind of catalyst you into a defeat with this army. So you have to play on a knife's edge the entire game, which is just not an easy thing to do, right? Like, I think it's probably going to end up as an A tier army because it has such potential with the outplays in Inari. Even Aspect Host, also a very strong detachment, has more raw power, but the Inari detachment with the lethal intent, with the extra moves, with the access to the Drukhari units, like, I think it just adds an extra level to it that just makes it so much harder to play against. But again, it does have some bad matchups. Really doesn't like vehicle heavy lists, especially with fire dragons. After you've killed 3 vehicles with 3 units of fire dragons, your fire dragons are going to be dead, and then the rest of your opponent's vehicles are going to still be alive and be an issue for you, right? Like, warp spiders can help chip one down, but like, you're spending so many resources after that point to kill vehicles that they'll probably just run away with the game. So like, your Imperial Knights, your Chaos Knights, your Iron Storms, any other vehicle-focused armies, it would kind of just like push Eldar to a very difficult match. So I think, yeah, A tier, could maybe see them in B tier, but I think A tier is probably correct for them. They still have so many tricks and they are so powerful to play. Next we have Astra Militarum, a very recent army as well, and they've got some really, really cool detachments in their new codex. Bridgehead, with getting all of its nerfs, definitely hurt the highest tier of the army. Bridgehead was way too strong how it was. We used it at Warp Wars to absolute, just devastating effect, doing a lot of damage. It just kills things way too fast, So that got brought down. So now there's a couple of interesting detachments, I think. I think the Hammer of the Emperor detachment with the tanks has some really good utility there, has a lot of good strength to it, but you also just don't get that many things because you have to take so many tanks. You're taking 2 to 3 Dawns, you're taking 2 to 3 Leman Russes, and, you know, maybe like a Hellhound to strip some cover and some other things. Like, you're taking so many vehicles, you don't get as much of the other stuff. Whereas the other detachment I think is really interesting is just the combined arms, the generic detachment. Whereas you kind of get the best of both worlds. You can take some Scions, you can take some tanks, you can take a Rogal Dawn commander, you can take a Leman Russ battle tank commander, you can take some just Russes, and like it all works and it all feels good. Like, and it plays 40k pretty fair. It just, you know, they have their orders which are always going to feel unfair, but that doesn't matter what version of Guide you're playing. But you can take the Engineers, you can take the Kriegers, you can take Catachan and Cascade. You have all these units that are just really efficient, especially when you give them orders for the +1 to hit, or extra move, or extra OC. You have so much tactical play, and I think Combined Arms exacerbates your orders the most over any other detachment. Whereas Hammer of the Emperor kind of has a bit more damage potential, but it kind of takes away a little bit of the tricks. But you have some extra different plays in different ways. So saying all that, I do think they're actually not horrible in the meta right now. They're not great either. So they're either like bottom of A or top of B. I think they're definitely better than Emperor's Children. Or are they? No, I don't think they are. I think they actually are right there. I think they're a strong army that can do some things, but it has some pretty horrible matchups. But it can play the field in a lot of the way. Yeah, I think they sit there, and like in the middle of B tier. Emperor's Children might for me. I keep on looking back at this. It's like, should this be up here in A? We'll leave it there for now, but that might get pushed up. We'll see. Next we have Black Templars. Now Black Templars didn't really get any love in the data slate. They'd been struggling quite a bit. They have a couple of really niche builds. They have the Righteous Crusaders build with all the Dreadnoughts and stuff like that to kind of give them 6 Inferno Pains and kind of have this durability check. But they just don't do enough damage, and they're just very slow and immobile and don't really do that much. And then you have the Ironstorm list, which is, I think, still actually kind of interesting. You get the multi-melders on all your extra vehicles. You're taking some really good vehicles as well, like the Gladiator chassis and the Predator chassis are all very good. And you just take a bunch of those. You take some Ballistas as well. Take maybe a Vindicator or two, and you have a very solid list. And you get those extra multi-melders, and you just kind of can stat check your way through it. But saying that, like, I think generic Marines, which we'll get to in a while, are just better. Like, they just do a lot more. So, and Black Templars don't do anything special. I think everything Black Templars do, normal, like, generic Marines, Ultramarines, is just do better in every single way. I think all the other detachments have something kind of interesting going for them, whereas the Black Templars, like the Righteous Crusaders detachment, just doesn't have enough going for it to keep it interesting. So I'm actually going to put them at the top of, if I can do that, of D tier, because they don't really have anything interesting going for them. They have some interesting units. Sword Brethren do still kill a lot. Sword Brethren and like a Gladius Task Force can be really interesting, but I just think Space Marines, Blood Angels, Space Wolves just kind of do a bit better. So they're going to be down in D tier. Also, something has to be in D tier, right? Because of how I do this. The next one is going to be Blood Angels. Blood Angels have a slew of interesting detachments. They did lose the Bloodless Angels, as it were, as you can't take no Blood Angels units and then get the +1 to wound. So the Liberators with no Blood Angels units is completely gone now, which is good. I think like that was kind of a silly kind of thing. Like, you want to be able to take like your Blood Angels units in your Blood Angels detachments. Like, I feel like that's how it should have always been, but you know, rules are rules. You got to work around how they're written. But I still think there's a couple of. I still think Liberators is pretty interesting. You get some just like the crazy amount of volume out of your buffs. Like pluses attack, pluses to strength is just a really good ability to have, especially with Oath of Moments. So you can get the rerolls. Their enhancements are really good. Also, like how Jack Harpster took Inheritors to a really high position at our LVO at the start of the year. I think that list really didn't get hit at all and is in a really good position, especially in singles, because you only have to win by a little bit. The Combi Lieutenant in that detachment is an absolute menace to deal with I think it's Ordained and Sacrifice, where it comes back up on a 2-up. A natively reactive moving lone op that can, if you get within 9 inches, reactive move, and if you only get within the 12 inch, the 9 to 12 inch gap, dies the first time he comes back, is such an awesome piece of tech to like really control primary or force extra trades. It's really interesting for singles play. Saying all that though, I don't think they're super strong. I think that they have pretty good, as many good matchups as they do bad matchups. So I think they're just going to go probably below Astra Militarum, but in B tier here. I can already see that this is probably going to have to get bumped up because I feel like there's some more B tierish kind of stuff here, but we'll see. But for the moment, I think they're better than Necrons, especially for a singles environment. They just have a bit more play across the field. Don't have to be a stat checky. They can just play really good 40k, have some really good melee, and I think melee is going to be very strong in the next slate. Until the next slate, melee is going to have such a really good place. So that's where I'm going to put them for now. Now we have what I am actually most excited about from the starter slate, which is the Chaos Demons, and specifically I'm really excited for the Incursion and the Shadow Legion, the new detachment that came out. So the Index and the newest one are the two that I'm most excited about. I also think there is place for the Plague Legion detachment with the upgrades to the Nurgle stuff, and I also think that Blood Legion, the Khorne one, is also really interesting with how they've kind of tweaked some things there. I think Scarbrand becomes very interesting. The Bloodthirsters are also very good. Getting the 3-up save is just really nice for them. But Shadow Legion just has some amazing rules. Like being able to take up to 1,000 points of CSM in your Demons army is very strong. So it kind of becomes a bit of CSM and Demons. But being able to have either like a unit of 10 chosen with a Chaos Lord that can, once it kills a unit in melee, it can go back up into reserve, and then you can free strat back down as rapid ingress on your opponent's turn and just constantly do that the entire game, is a very powerful ability, and you're going to trade up most of the time, especially if you play it correctly. It's just such an efficient tool there, followed by all the demons buffs you get. Khorne getting advance in charge, Tzeentch getting -1 to hit always, Nurgle getting the bodyguard rule that if your strength's higher than toughness, -1 to wound. All that stuff is just so amazing, right? Like, none of that is bad. So, really interesting with how all that can kind of come together. I've got a video, I'll link it up above. It'll be like, I don't know, here somewhere. Who knows? It'll be in the video. Talking about why I'm excited about Chaos Demons and the new Shadow Legion detachment, and some kind of builds that I've started thinking of to get going. But where do I think that it sits in the meta? Well, I actually think it's quite strong. I think you can build a Shadow Legion list to be very good into pretty much anything. It's obviously always going to have bad matchups because you can't tech for everything, and I specifically think Custodes are actually quite a bad matchup for them because it's very hard to get enough good profiles to kill the Custodes. But at the same time, one bad matchup doesn't make you a bad faction. So I think that they are going to be, and this, I'm maybe a little bit biased here because I'm very excited to play this army. This is probably what I'm going to be maining, especially on TTS for the next little bit, because I'm very interested in it. And I think it plays in such a fun and different way. And I am such a list brewer at heart that it has so many options to build with, because you have all the demons and so much of the Chaos Space Marine lists to be able to meld together with some really interesting enhancements and stratagems, that it's a brewer's, like a list builder's like dream. So with all of that said, this is gonna be the first thing I'm gonna put into S tier. This might not be correct, but I think because you can build a list to battle any meta with how it's built at the moment, I think they're just going to be very strong. And I think piloted well, this army could really, really push a lot of matchups. Next, we have the Sister. We have Chaos Space Marines. sister, I guess. Yeah, the sister faction, Chaos Space Marines. And I think these are actually also in a very, very cool spot. We have Raiders, like Renegade Raiders, which is very strong, very fast, hits really hard, good shooting, good melee. You can take the Accursed Cultist bricks, you can not, and just take a bunch of good shooting, and then some Legionnaires units, maybe a Chosen unit, and you have a really good kind of like midfield presence. You're very fast, which like fast guns are always good. So like triple Predators, maybe even a Predator, like a couple of Annihilators, a couple of Destructors, trying to push through some more damage there. And you kind of build it a lot heavier that way. I think that list is really interesting. I still think Veterans probably has a build that people haven't figured out yet. Like getting Oath as your detachment route is pretty strong. The strats in there are pretty interesting. You get some pretty cool tech pieces. But there is probably something missing there. It doesn't have the extra damage that you need. Whereas then we go on to the most overwhelming of the detachments, which is the Creations of Bile detachment, right? This can all in pretty much any army in the game. If it gets to hit you with all of its pieces, it's never going to lose a game. So the goal is to try and get in a bit more piecemeal. I think there's some really interesting different styles of lists up there. I think there's the Anthony Vanilla style with the double Huntsman and the 30-odd Possessed / Chosen. I think that list is really interesting. That really pushing so much pressure on their opponent. Then you also have the Ryan and New Zealand's list, which is I think it's 20 Possessed, 10 Chosen, and then 10 Warp Talons. So you play like the mid board a bit more efficiently, and you can kind of keep the trading game going until they have to come forward, and then you can push everything. So it's a bit more patient of a list, which I kind of like that as well, because it kind of forces your opponent into two bad situations. They either sit back and then the bio play gets all the primary, or they come out and then the bio play can cripple them. Really, really kind of cool list there as well. Similar to how the Huntsman list works as well, but just in a different kind of way. So saying all that, where do I think they sit? I think they are probably the top of A tier. I think they're better than Custodes. I think just with especially the bio lists, the pressure that they can put on is just insane, and a lot of armies just can't deal with it at the moment. Especially if they get to go first, get to stage up, your opponent only gets one turn before you can actually hit them. And then if they make any mistakes, then you can just capitalize on all of it, and you can really, really push games, really push differentials in teams as well. I think they're a great teams army. And yeah, I think with the kind of mix of those, makes them very, very strong at the moment. Renegades, I think also the triple AC/DC list can be really interesting. Again, it puts so much pressure on. Chaos Space Marines don't really win the trade wars very often. Their pieces are slightly too expensive for that, because like 5 Chosen with a Lord is over 200 points. So it's like your trade pieces are slightly more expensive than you want them to be, but they do hit quite hard, especially with like dark packs and stuff like that. But they're just a bit too expensive. Whereas they do have the raw damage power and the speed and movement that they need to kind of overwhelm. So like if you play that kind of style, I think they can be very, very strong here. So we'll put them in A tier. Next we have Dark Angels. I've talked to a couple of people about where they think Dark Angels are at the moment. I haven't played into them in a very long time, and haven't played with them in a very long time, to be fair. But where I think they sit is kind of to the CD tier. I don't think that there is much going for them. There's a couple of their attachments are okay, but they're not very they're okay, but they have a lot of bad matchups. They have an interesting Stormlance build, but I think there's just other better things you can be doing with Marines in general. I think the most interesting thing I have for them is just a Gladius build with Deathwing Terminators. The -1 to wound and 4 damage at the moment is actually quite good. So I think that can pump them up a little bit. I think that you can definitely win a bit more with trying to play that kind of style of game. But I still think it's an uphill battle. It's definitely somewhere in here. Where I put them doesn't really matter at the moment. Let's put them at the bottom of C tier. Ooh, I love how these things just have a mind of their own. But yeah, let's put Dark Angels at the bottom of C tier at the moment. I think they do have some alright matchups, but like, again, I'd rather be playing like an Ultramarines Gladius than a Dark Angels Gladius. I don't think it does enough unique things from the characters that you get that Calgar and Guilliman kind of offer from not taking Dark Angels. but I might be wrong there. Next we have Drukhari. Now, realistically, Drukhari are on like 3 knife's edges compared to Aeldari's 1's knife edge, right? You lose a couple of extra resources on any turn and the game is just over. Whereas Aeldari can lose a couple of things and they can kind of get back on that knife's edge. They can jump off and then kind of jump back on. Drukhari just don't have that. If you make one mistake, it can be game over. And this is why I think Ascari and Scardcast does such an amazing job with his battle reports, because he shows you how you have to combat every single situation with the one specific army. So definitely would go watch his content. I really, really rate Ascari's content. He's one of my favorite content creators for 40k, just because he sticks to his thing, but he also knows he has such an in-depth knowledge on what he talks about that like you can really take it to heart and you really trust and believe everything that he says. Saying that though, I don't think Drukhari are very good. I think they have a lot of issues. There's so much in the meta right now that is dangerous for them. They can't go into the overwhelming armies. They're fine at trading. They're actually quite good into the trading armies. I just don't think the trading stuff is that prominent at the moment. You're not sending 1 unit out for that 1 unit. You're kind of sending 3 units out and killing 5, and then they're only able to kill 1 or 2 in return, which I don't think Drukhari are good at, unless they kind of bait it out, whereas then like it's more a generalship thing than a army versus army kind of matchup. So I'm going to put them in D tier, just because I know that something has to go there. Oof, that feels bad. Actually, no. Let's put Dark Angels in D tier and Drukhari in C tier, because I feel like that feels a little bit better. I don't think Dark Angels are very good, and I think Drukhari are better than Dark Angels, so I think that's probably where that kind of sits for now. So Drukhari in C tier. Next we have Genestealer Cults. Now there's quite a few different Genestealer Cult builds that are very good. You have the new Grotmist attachment, the Final Day, very strong. Biocentric, really good at that pressure, that kind of all-in style. You have Outlander, which isn't really seen much at the moment, but I think is just very good at just plain 40k. To contest objectives, kills the stuff off of objectives, holds its own primary. It's like it just plays that very well. And then you also have Host of Ascension if you want to break your back and play 150 plus models. But it also hits really hard, does that board control, does that overwhelm kind of thing. Like there's so many of the lists at the moment kind of overpressure you and force you into a bad option. And I think that's really prevalent at the moment. So if you can find a list that either overwhelms more or can clap back from an overwhelming position really well, I think you're in a really good position. So where do I think Genestealer Cults sit? Well, I think they're probably an A tier army. And I think they're probably better than Aeldari, just because they also have a very good matchup into Aeldari, I think, especially Final Day and Host of Ascension have really good matchups into Aeldari. And they also just can play pretty much any army and just be kind of fine. I think they're just in a really good position. So I think I'm going to sit them in just in the middle of A tier somewhere. Next we have Grey Knights. They got hit a little bit. The Warpbane Task Force, you now can't shoot your indirect with the rerolls. With the indirect, the pseudo-indirect, the Purgation squads that if another Psychic can see, you can shoot with Purgation. So that's kind of gone, which was kind of like a bit of a crutch for that detachment, to be fair. You weren't seeing many Warpbane Task Force without 2 to 3 Purgation squads. So I think you probably go back to the index now. Rerolls is a very good army ability to have, and being able to just manipulate it a lot of the time so you have it in your shooting phase is really strong. But the kind of tricks and stuff you can do with the index attachment, I think is just probably better now. You get better late game plays. You're playing for that late game. You're faster because you have the auto advance. I think all that kind of stuff actually probably makes the index attachment a lot stronger than the new Warpbane one. So where would I put Grey Knights? I think, again, they have some pretty good matchups, especially the index attachment has some good matchups, some bad matchups. I think they're probably around the same places I would put Necrons, so I'm going to put them in B tier. I think this is probably the correct place for them. Next we have Leagues of Votann. They got a little bit of a buff in the data slate with the new detachment getting 2 judge tokens, and then the index attachment is still getting the same 4 because it's -2, but you still get 2 at the start, so it equals out the same. So it kind of helps that attachment a little bit, but I still think the Oathband, the Index attachment is still probably better. Having more Judgment tokens, I call them Grudge tokens, it's a Grudgeon. Judgment tokens at the beginning just means that you can play a bit more aggressively. You don't have to wait until some of your things die before your armies get a buff. You can kind of pick 3 really important things to kill and 1 easy thing to kill, and then kind of capitalize on the extra CP you can get, or forces your opponent to play back with the units for a bit longer. I think that kind of style list is still really interesting. I actually think it can be quite strong at the moment. I don't think leagues have that many bad matchups, and I don't think they have that many good matchups. But I think that they're an army that, as long as something goes your way, you can win every game. So I actually think what I'm going to do here is I think I'm going to put Emperor's Children into A tier, and I'm going to put leagues just around the same place as Astra Militarum in B tier. I think I'm pretty happy with this at the moment. I think Leagues of Votann are surprisingly good for what they get. You have the Sagittars with the scout moves, you can get some great board presence. The Jaegers to guarantee you getting your scout moves. You have land forts, which is just really durable. Yes, AOC change does hurt, but it hurt everything. But it's better for Leagues of Votann's damage output. So there's all sorts of really interesting things here. And I think you can play the kind of decent trading game. You can play the overwhelm game with shoving so much in your opponent's face. You can kind of play however you need to with just the generic Votann list. You can play really safe, go for a couple of point win, or if your opponent sends a lot out, you can actually go forth and really hit really hard and deal with it. So I think they're actually in quite an interesting place. So I put leagues in B tier. I wouldn't be surprised if these guys actually punch up. If there's more Votann players around, I definitely think pick them back up again and give them a couple of games, because I think that they can really push, really push. Next we have Orks. Well, the new Mordecca detachment is silly, man. It's just too good. To be fair, it's just too good. It shouldn't be as good as it is. Sustained Hits 2 was a mistake. I can't wait for it to get FAQ'd or errated to it be just Sustained Hits. Then I just think the detachment's good. It's not overwhelmingly good, but the strats that it has access to are just crazy. The rest of Orks is, I think, really interesting if you just ignored Mordecca as a detachment. I think Warhorde's a really good attachment at the moment. Bully Boys has, I think, got some really good gas in it. Tactical, I think, maybe got hit a little too much, but is also still fine. It's a really interesting way to play Orks now. It's a lot more kind of tradey instead of going all in with shooting. You can kind of, I don't even know if you take the flash gets in that detachment anymore. You can kind of just play in a different style. There's some really interesting things you can do with Orks. But with Mordecca being just so pushed as a detachment, there's no way it cannot be the top of S tier, right? This army can just kill any army in about 2 shooting phases if it really wanted to. It is just absolutely absurd the amount of output that it has. So putting it in the top of S, it's gonna sit there. If it takes any nerfs, I think it's just a solid A tier army, and I think that's probably where it should sit. But hopefully they nerf Mordecca before the next balanced data slate. I think it is a mistake that you get Sustained Hits 2 on all your walkers and infantry, just with the value of looters getting rerolls on objectives, the damage output of tank busters, especially into vehicles, and even stuff like Gorkonauts and stuff that have 30 shots that with Sustained Hits 2. It's just too many shots, especially if you get them hitting on 4s, which is effectively hitting on 2s if you have Sustained Hits 2. So it's 30 shots hit, it's 24 hits with the Gorkonauts guns. It's absolutely insane. Stuff like that just shouldn't exist. Sustained Hits 1 is totally fine. Sustained Hits 2 is just so pushed. So they're going to be in S tier. Next we have Chaos Knights. This army I think is low-key like a gatekeeper, but it's also kind of a bad gatekeeper. So many armies now have the damage profiles to kill it, and especially with the new Orks attachment and even tactical, they just pick up so many knights at a turn. Eldar can pick up a couple of knights but then struggle, so then that's a bad matchup. I think Genestealer Cult can actually just overwhelm them. Custodes can just kill them. Bile can just kill them. So I think all these armies are just pretty tough for Chaos Knights to deal with. I do think they have some good matchups though. I think and the Grey Knights and Even Leagues is pretty bad. Okay, now I'm convincing myself otherwise. I think these guys are just a solid C tier army, and I think I'll put them above Drukhari. Actually, I'm going to swap that around. I'm going to put Death Guard at the back there. I like Death Guard less and less. So yeah, in C tier, we have Chaos Knights. I think they have some interesting like play style, but the play style hasn't changed in like 2 years now. It's kind of like you take your 12 to 13 dogs and you just play your game. It does fairly well. It can play the trading game. It can play the overwhelm game. But if you have dedicated anti-tank and enough of it, it kind of just falls apart. Especially if you have anti-tank, shooting, and melee, you can really push a Chaos Knight army, which a lot of these armies are starting to have access to. Now we have Space Marines, and I'm just going to call this Ultramarines because it's kind of what it is right now. You take Guilliman and Calgar, and you have the best CP generation in the game. Yes, it is an expensive combo, but it is super worth it in a Gladius Task Force list because you have the best strats in the game. You have every strat you could really ask for realistically. They're putting things into doctrine, so you have super flexibility there. You have the Lance and +1 AP. You have the reactive move. You have all these things that are just super good to play 40k with. And now you have the CP to just use as many of them as you want. Realistically, you get 30 CP a game effectively, or 29 if you go second, something like that. It's an insane amount of CP to have access to. So it's quite pushed. I think there's definitely like the Gladius list, especially with Blade Guard now. I think Blade Guard are really interesting at 160 points. Jonty used them the other weekend really well in the Tactical Chili team. And I think there's a lot of things you can play around with. With a Judicia, they have the fights first. You can heroic them really well. They're free heroics, or you're always going to have CP to heroic. And then if you do that, if you still have CP, because you made a charge move, you can get Lance and +1 AP, or Lance, and then if you're in the Assault Doctrine, you get +1 AP. So there's a lot of tricks you can do with it, and the more you play it, the more you'll kind of open up to how much you can do with this unit and how much you can do with the army. And it's kind of the sky's the limit. So I think that these are probably one of the best armies in the game. I'm probably going to put them above Chaos Demons. I just think they're very strong. You can build them in so many different ways. I think the Ironstorm list is still very strong. I think there's like Liberius lists that can be pretty interesting. The Vanguard list got kind of killed. I'm really interested to see where people innovate with the Vanguard lists. But I think Gladius is just takes the cake. It's just too... Every time I've played Space Marines, and I play a lot of Space Marines, every time I play something that's not Gladius, I kind of think at the end of the game, like, I probably would have been able to do the same amount, if not more, if I was just Gladius. Especially Ironstorm, Firestorm, all those kind of Stormlance. All those ones, like, they're good, but Gladius kind of just does it and more. So it's really tough. I think Gladius is actually the issue in Space Marines more than anything else, because it's just so well rounded. There's nothing bad in it. Everything about it is good. But yeah, so I think Orks are still better because I think Orks can still clean face against Space Marines. It's much more interesting of a matchup though. Especially with like access to AOC and cover and all that kind of stuff. It can make the matchup pretty interesting. But I still think Orks win it on average. Next we have Space Wolves. Champions of Rust I actually think is a solid attachment. It has got some really interesting pieces, and getting sustained hits or advanced charge and all these kind of things you can kind of build around is really strong. You get access to Bjorn, who's a great Vect aura, the aura of strats cost more, and you can still take a Calidus Assassin as an ally, which is really strong. Also, I'm not counting agents as allies here. I'm just counting them as their own faction. If you take them as allies, cool. They can be ranked higher, sure. But you can get all these kind of tools. You get Wolfen, which are very efficient trade pieces. And you get Thunderwolf, which probably are a little expensive now. You probably don't want to take them in Champions of Rust. They're probably only still in the Stormlance thing. But you get kind of some nice tools, and then you can kind of fill it out with a normal Space Marine list, and you do pretty well. Saying that though, I just don't see them doing that well. They don't have enough gas in the tank to really push the stuff, like really push. So I'm gonna put them down with their other D tier brothers, and I think I'm more interested in them than probably the other two. So I'm just gonna put them at the top of D tier, but they are probably, like, they're struggling. I think this is the real issue I have with Marines at the moment, is there is no reason not to play Ultramarines. Everything else is just worse. Blood Angels is worse, but actually has a lot more tools because, again, the game's more melee focused at the moment, so having more melee tools is just better. So Blood Angels is really good there. Blake Templars don't really gain any melee tools. Space Wolves have a couple of melee tools, but not a lot, and then they only really have a couple of melee units, and they're only okay for like trading pieces. They're not really good at pressuring much at all. Whereas Ultramarines and Blood Angels have all the tools. It's just crazy. Like they get all the good stuff. They get all the good stuff at the moment. Next we have my favourite faction in 40k, which is the Tau Empire. It's the army that got me back into 40k in 8th edition, and I wouldn't be doing content today if I didn't find one of those in a store in Southampton, and I was like, oh, I'm going to go and build some of those, and then get addicted to 40k again, and then get really addicted to playing competitive 40k. So thanks to the Southampton club for letting me come in and then be a little competitive little nasty. But there was a very cool crew there. I really appreciated all those guys. So where do I think Tau go? The new detachment isn't that great. I've had more and more time to think about it, and it's just a damage check army. But at least it can do its damage check from turn 1. I think Kion's probably still the strongest. I think there's arguments for Auxiliary Cadre as well, because they just play a game, but they have some more bad matchups. I think Kion can play a lot of games fairly well. They can play into most factions fairly well, because you can just slow the game down, get to turn 3, and then it doesn't really matter what you're playing against. You start killing things a lot faster than they can kill you because of how much damage you can do with your units. So, I don't know. I don't think they're in a great place. I really don't. So I think they go at... I think they're going to be the 6th B tier army. I think they're pretty better than AdMech and Chaos Knights. But I think they're just very middling. I don't think they're better than Grey Knights. They're better. They beat Grey Knights specifically, but I don't think they're better than Grey Knights. I think Grey Knights play a game better than they do. And also they're not as one-dimensional as Adeptus Mechanicus, kind of ironically saying Tau, the shooting-only army, is not one-dimensional. But how they play is not as one-dimensional as we deny primaries. They play a lot of the different parts of the game, especially now with the rampages going down a couple of points, which is really nice for them. So yeah, I think they're going to be my 6th B tier army, because I get 2 armies, I think 3 armies, 2 or 3 armies that have 6 in here. Next we are going to have Thousand Suns. Now I think all this is going to have to like lift up a little bit, because I think we'll rejig at the end. We'll rejig at the end. So Thousand Suns, one of the highest damage armies in the game, as frail as the most frail army in the game. Your army is Magnus and a bunch of 2-wound idiots, which is, again, there's so much damage 2 and 3 in the game right now. So having a bunch of 2-wound idiots is not the greatest place to be, especially when all your damage, apart from Magnus, comes from these 2-wound idiots. But they do so much damage if you let them. Their characters make everything do so much more damage. You have a lot of tricks. I think piloted well, this can be like an A... like top of B, A tier army, top of A tier army if you piloted really well. But the average player, it's probably more of a C tier, and I'm actually going to just throw it probably in the middle, probably around the Drukhari level. I'll put Drukhari in front, just for Skari. Around that area. I don't think they're much better than that. I think that's just kind of where they sit. They're just one of those armies that the durability just isn't up there. They're so glass hammery. If you play them perfectly and you can just hit all your opponent's stuff and you can wipe them out, great. But this is more of a knife's edge than the Drukhari, right? Like, everything in your army dies so fast apart from Magnus. But yeah, so that's the Thousand Suns. They didn't really get anything in the data slate either, which I was really hoping for like a couple of points cuts just to make them a bit more interesting again. I think they got hit a bit too hard with the points cuts and the nerfs that they got. Next we have Tyranids. I think Tyranids are very interesting. I think they can play into a huge amount of the field. And I think that they can just be a really good blunter and just win by a couple of points. Yeah, Invasion Fleet's great for that. Vanguard's great for that. Vanguard's great at pressuring. Again, good pressure melee. I think Synaptic Nexus has some pretty interesting builds. I think Assimilation Swarm has that really grindy kind of, okay, I'm just going to keep regaining wounds, keep rezzing, and just kind of whittle you down throughout the game kind of playstyle. I think all these are really, really interesting things to like look into. I don't think the Grotmist detachment with the Tyranid Warriors is very strong. I actually played against it once, and it didn't really impress me. But I do think that just generic Tyranids are very good. They have very interesting data sheets. They hit pretty hard. They have really good tricks. The Shadows in the Warp and with Lictors and all this kind of stuff, and Aero Lictors, it's really good tools to have. And if you play it really well, I think you can go really far with them. So I think that they're probably going to go into B tier as well, which means I think Astra gets pushed into here, and I think I might push these two for now up into S tier. And I'm going to put these guys at the top of B tier because I think they're the perfect B tier army. Just kind of like Necrons, but I think they're slightly better than Necrons. Is they kind of can just do everything. You can build them in so many different ways. You can do you get gargoyles, which is an amazing data sheet. You get good shooting. You have you can be fast. You can hit hard and melee. You can do all sorts of different stuff. You can build it to whatever you want the army to do, and it can do that fairly well. Does it win every tournament? No, gosh no. There is so much about Tyranids that it kind of if you lose one or two extra pieces, you can just fall apart. So you got to kind of weigh your ups and downs. But the flexibility that they have and the skill ceiling that the army has, I think definitely keeps it in that kind of B tier area. Cool. Okay. Next we have World Eaters. Now, World Eaters. I think World Eaters go in the... I think they go in C tier. I think it's the top of C tier, but I think it is C tier. They have a good build. I don't think it's very good in singles. I think Custodes are getting more and more popular, which is definitely not good for World Eaters. And I think the fact that it's a melee-centric time is actually a bad thing for World Eaters. World Eaters love having a bunch of shooting and a bunch of other armies to feed on because they just eat those matches up so easily. Whereas if there's a bunch of melee, then they need a tech for other melee, and then there's more things like built to beat World Eaters, which kind of pushes them down a little bit in a weird way. Because they're all in on melee. They don't do anything else. They do still have some very strong abilities. The new detachment is interesting, but I think just wanting to have Angron be able to come back more consistently is, I think, just makes the index detachment so much more consistent. And like, yes, you're kind of praying to the Blood God to get the sixes to get Angron back, but if you get it, awesome. You're in your position, and with the amount of rolls you can get in the index, you consistently should get them back at least once a game. Just hopefully roll it at the right time. Then last but not least, we have Imperial Knights. Now, I actually think Imperial Knights... I think Imperial Knights are in a really interesting position. I think the fact that you can run like 12 little guys and get a big knight, or 12 little guys get 2 immolators and then 2 characters, and you just go super, super wide, and getting the reroll to hit, reroll to wound on everything makes them like crazy consistent, and you just get so much value out of everything. It plays very similarly to CK, but in a very different way. Like it plays similarly for the fact that it's just like 12 to 14 vehicles, right? But being able to strip cover, having all the damage 3 profiles, which is actually quite good in the meta at the moment. Then having the melters, like you have, and like the list with the immolators, you get what? You get 6 good melters and then 2 multi-melters from the immolators. That's a lot of just like high quality damage that's getting like consistent rerolls. You're doing good damage. The 12-inch melter range is really brutal. They're fast moving. And then you have the backfield of all the Helverins to just push that extra damage 3 shots out. You have Squire's Duty to get the extra AP and stuff. I think it actually has some really interesting play there. It's really, really cool stuff. So I'm actually going to... Oh, where do I put them? I want to keep... Like, my B tier I'm very happy with. My C tier I'm really happy with. I need to put one more thing in A tier. And I think my S tier I'm happy with. I think that's pretty strong. I don't know if that's correct. It doesn't feel right. Yeah, I think the fact that they're vehicles and there's just like with Orks there, Space Marines also being pretty good at killing vehicles. Custodes very good at killing vehicles. I don't think that they sit in A tier. Also, Astras can be. Actually, no, Astra's pretty bad at killing more than toughness 10 stuff. Maybe they do sit there. Maybe because again, you can take 12 and a big guy. 12 and a big guy is actually a great list at the moment. Like, I think that's just so interesting. The fact that you get so many little guys in your chaos, in your Imperial Knight lists, might push them to be actually quite good because the Imperial big guys are just better than the Chaos Knight big guys. So it's kind of like you get better Brigands in Chaos Knights, but you get better big guys in Imperial Knights. I'm actually going to keep that. I feel like that actually feels pretty good to me. I think having like a vehicle skew here, they definitely have Orks at the top. Space Marines, Chaos Demons, Chaos Space Marines, and Adeptus Custodes is my S tier. Then I have Genestealers, Aeldari, Emperor's Children, Astra Militarum, and Imperial Knights is my A tier. Then I have Tyranids, Leagues of Votann, Blood Angels, Necrons, Grey Knights, and Tau Empire as my B tier. Then I have my C tier as World Eaters, Adeptus Mechanicus, Chaos Knights, Drukhari, Thousand Suns, and Death Guard. Then my D tier, I have all the other Marines. I have Space Wolves, Dark Angels, Black Templars, Sisters, and then, just for Ashley, Imperial Agents in last place. Yeah, this has been really fun. I really wish that I could have gotten someone on to do this with me, but just because of my internet at the moment, I kind of have to run a solo gig right now. But I really hope you enjoyed this video. I really enjoy making all this stuff. Please like this video, subscribe, comment down below what you would change in this, where you think I've gone completely off the radar and where you think I'm really, really close. Comment it all down below. There'll be a video up here somewhere to watch next. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.